The gym smelled like sweat and rubber mats, the kind of place where egos got tested every single day. Marcus Chen stood near the heavy bags, wrapping his hands with black tape, watching the door like he always did. He had that look about him, the kind that made people step aside in hallways. 6 feet tall, shoulders like concrete blocks, and a black belt tied around his waist that wasn't just for show. He'd earned it through years of brutal training, competitions, and more than a few street fights he didn't like to talk about. The martial arts studio was his second home. He taught classes 3 times a week, mostly to businessmen who wanted to feel tough, and teenagers whose parents thought discipline would fix their attitudes. Marcus enjoyed the respect. He enjoyed the way people looked at him when he demonstrated a throw or a submission hold. He'd been the top fighter at this gym for 3 years running, and nobody had come close to challenging that position. That Tuesday evening started like any other. The advanced class had just finished, and most students were packing up their gear. Marcus was talking to his buddy Jake about an upcoming tournament when the door opened. A woman walked in, and Marcus barely glanced up at first. She looked ordinary, maybe late 20s, average height, with her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore plain black workout clothes, nothing fancy, nothing that screamed fighter. She approached the front desk and spoke quietly to Sarah, the receptionist. Marcus couldn't hear what they were saying, but he saw Sarah nodding, pointing toward the changing rooms. The woman thanked her and walked past the main training area. That's when Marcus really looked at her. She moved differently than most people. Her steps were light, balanced, like she was aware of every inch of space around her. But her appearance was so unassuming that Marcus dismissed the observation almost immediately. "New member?" Jake asked, following Marcus's gaze. "Probably another one looking for a cardio workout," Marcus said, his tone dismissive. The gym got those types all the time. People who watched too many action movies and thought they could become fighters in a month. They usually quit after the first hard sparring session. 20 minutes later, Marcus was working on his kicks against a standing bag when he noticed the woman had returned. She'd changed into a plain white gi. No belt, no patches, nothing that indicated rank or affiliation. She was stretching near the corner, moving through positions with a fluid grace that caught his attention again. She didn't look around nervously like most newcomers did. She didn't seek approval or guidance. She just stretched, focused entirely on her own body. Marcus walked over, wiping sweat from his forehead with a towel. He had a habit of introducing himself to new people, especially women. He liked being the welcoming committee, the expert who could offer tips and guidance. It made him feel important. "First time here?" he asked, standing close enough to establish his presence. She looked up at him, her expression neutral. "Yes, just checking the place out. I'm Marcus. I teach the advanced classes here. Been training for 15 years. He said it with the kind of pride that expected recognition. "Nice to meet you," she said simply. She didn't offer her name. Marcus waited, but when she didn't elaborate, he felt a small prick of irritation. Most people were impressed when he mentioned his experience. "What's your background? Any martial arts training?" "A little bit here and there," she said, returning to her stretching. "A little bit here and there." Marcus almost laughed. That's what they all said right before they got humbled on the mats. He could see she had some flexibility, sure, but that didn't mean much. Flexibility didn't win fights. Power and technique did, and he had both in abundance. "Well, if you want some pointers, I'm happy to help," he offered, his tone dripping with condescension he didn't even recognize in himself. It can be intimidating starting out, especially in a place like this where the training is pretty intense. She looked at him directly now, and for just a second, Marcus saw something in her eyes. It wasn't fear or gratitude. It was something else, something measured and calm that made him slightly uncomfortable. But then she smiled politely and said, "Thanks, I'll keep that in mind." Marcus nodded and walked away, already dismissing her from his thoughts. Jake was waiting by the water fountain, grinning. "Striking out," Jake teased. "Not interested," Marcus lied. "She seems like a beginner anyway. Probably won't last a week." But as the evening went on, Marcus found his attention drifting back to her. She'd moved to the technique area now, working through basic strikes on a pad. Her movements were clean, economical, no wasted motion. Each punch and kick landed with a sharp snap that echoed across the gym. It was good form, he had to admit. Better than he'd expected. Maybe she'd trained at some McDojo that taught flashy moves without real substance. One of the younger students, a green belt named Tommy, approached her and asked if she wanted to do some light drills. She agreed, and they moved to an open mat. Marcus watched from across the room, pretending to adjust his gear. Tommy was showing off, throwing combinations faster than he should during a friendly drill. The woman absorbed it all calmly, blocking and deflecting with minimal effort. Then something happened that made Marcus stop what he was doing entirely. Tommy threw a wild hook punch, putting too much commitment into it like young fighters often do. The woman didn't just block it. She redirected it with a subtle wrist movement that Marcus almost missed, simultaneously stepping off the center line and positioning herself at an angle where she had complete control. It was a high-level technique, the kind that took years to develop, and she'd done it so smoothly that Tommy didn't even realize how badly he'd been countered. Marcus felt something stir in his chest. Not quite concern, but awareness. This woman wasn't a complete beginner. She had training, real training. But how much? And from where? The drill ended, and Tommy bowed, thanking her with genuine respect. She bowed back and moved to grab some water. Marcus saw his opportunity. He walked over, making sure his approach was casual, non-threatening. "Not bad," he said, leaning against the wall near the water station. "You've got some decent basics. Where'd you train before?" "Different places," she said, taking a sip from her bottle. "Moved around a lot." "Military?" Marcus asked. It would explain the vagueness and the transient lifestyle. She paused for just a fraction of a second. "Something like that." Marcus's ego flared. Something like that. The way she said it, so casual, like her experience was on par with his, maybe even dismissive of his question. He'd spent 15 years perfecting his craft. He'd competed nationally. He'd trained with some of the best fighters in the country. And here was this woman, who wouldn't even share her name or background, acting like it was no big deal. "You know," Marcus said, his voice taking on a challenging edge he couldn't quite suppress, "we do light sparring sessions on Tuesday nights. Nothing too serious, just controlled contact. Good way to see how techniques work against a resisting opponent." She looked at him with those calm, measuring eyes again. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm really just here to get a workout in." "Come on," Marcus pressed, his competitive nature fully engaged now. "You've clearly got some skills. Would be interesting to see how they hold up. Unless you're worried about getting hit." He said it with a smile, but there was a taunt buried in the words. She set down her water bottle slowly. For a moment, Marcus thought she was going to walk away, and part of him hoped she would so he could tell Jake later about the woman who talked big but chickened out. But instead, she met his eyes directly. "Light contact?" she confirmed. "Light contact," Marcus agreed, though his definition of light was probably different from most people's. "Just for fun, no egos." She nodded once. "Okay." Marcus felt a surge of satisfaction as they walked to the main sparring area. A few other students noticed and started gathering around. This was going to be good. He'd go easy on her at first. Let her get a few techniques off so she wouldn't be embarrassed. Then show her the difference between training at random gyms and training seriously. It would be a teaching moment. They both put on protective gear, headgear, gloves, shin guards. Marcus noticed she adjusted her equipment with practiced efficiency, the movements of someone who'd geared up thousands of times. They stepped onto the mat and bowed to each other. Marcus bounced lightly on his toes, hands up in his traditional fighting stance. The woman stood differently. Her stance was narrower, weight distributed evenly, hands positioned in a way Marcus didn't immediately recognize. It wasn't karate, wasn't traditional kickboxing. Something else. "Ready?" Marcus asked. She nodded. They touched gloves, and Marcus immediately pressed forward with a quick jab, testing her reactions. She slipped it easily, moving her head just enough. Marcus threw a low kick, medium power, expecting to catch her off guard. She checked it perfectly, shin to shin, the impact reverberating through his leg more than he'd anticipated. He circled, feinting with his lead hand. She didn't bite, didn't react to the fake. That was good awareness. Marcus stepped in with a 1-2 combination. Jab and cross. Both techniques he'd thrown 10,000 times. She blocked the first, redirected the second, and before Marcus could reset, she'd closed the distance. What happened next took less than 2 seconds but felt like a lifetime. The woman moved into what looked like a clinch, but her hands were already controlling his posture, breaking his structure. Marcus tried to use his strength to push her away, but she'd positioned herself so that his force worked against him. She executed a throw, a perfectly timed foot sweep combined with upper body control, and suddenly Marcus was airborne. He landed on his back, not hard enough to hurt, but definitely hard enough to shock him. The padded mat absorbed most of the impact, but his ego took the full hit. The gym went quiet. Marcus could feel every eye on him as he stared up at the ceiling, trying to process what just happened. The woman stepped back, giving him space to get up. She wasn't gloating or celebrating. Her expression remained neutral, maybe even slightly apologetic. Marcus got to his feet, his face burning. "Nice throw," he managed to say, though his voice was tight. "Thanks," she said quietly. "Maybe we should stop here." But stopping now would be admitting defeat, admitting that she was better. Marcus couldn't let that stand. No, I just wasn't expecting that. Let's go again. For real this time." She hesitated, and Marcus saw something in that hesitation that he should have paid attention to. It wasn't fear of losing, it was concern. But his pride was screaming too loudly for him to hear the warning. "Come on," he insisted. "I was going easy. Let's actually spar." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "If you're sure." They reset, and this time Marcus came in seriously. He threw a fast combination. Jab, cross, hook, putting real power behind the strikes. She evaded the first two and blocked the third. But Marcus was already transitioning, trying to use his reach advantage to keep her at distance. She closed the gap faster than he thought possible, getting inside his range where his long strikes were less effective. Marcus tried to tie her up, to use his weight and strength, but it was like trying to hold water. Every time he thought he had control, she'd shifted position, broken his grip, established her own control points. He felt her hand on the back of his head, a firm grip that controlled his posture. He tried to pull away, but she was already moving, executing another technique. This time it was more complex, a combination of striking and grappling that Marcus's brain couldn't quite categorize. He felt his balance compromised again, felt himself being guided downward, and then he was on the mat once more, this time in a position where she could have transitioned to a dozen different submissions. She released immediately and stood up, offering her hand to help him up. Marcus ignored it, getting to his feet on his own. His breathing was heavy, more from emotion than exertion. The gym was still quiet, everyone watching. "You okay?" she asked softly. Marcus wanted to snap at her, to demand another round, to keep going until he won. But something in her tone, in her genuine concern, stopped him. This wasn't a victory celebration on her part. She wasn't trying to humiliate him, she was just better, and she'd been trying to spare him this embarrassment from the beginning. "Yeah," he said finally, pulling off his gloves. "I'm good." They bowed to each other again, and the small crowd that had gathered started to disperse, conversations starting up about what they'd just witnessed. Marcus walked to the edge of the mat, grabbed his water bottle, and tried to look like his entire self-image hadn't just been shattered. Jake approached, unsure whether to console or congratulate. "Man, that was..." "Don't," Marcus cut him off. "Just don't." He looked back at the woman, who was removing her protective gear with the same quiet efficiency she did everything. Who was she? Where had she trained? What style was that? The questions burned in his mind, competing with the humiliation for attention. Sarah from the front desk walked over to the woman, talking to her in low tones. Marcus strained to hear but couldn't make out the words. The woman nodded, collected her things, and headed toward the changing rooms without looking back at Marcus or anyone else. "Did Sarah say who she was?" Marcus asked Jake, trying to sound casual and failing. "No idea, man. But whoever she is, she just made you look like a white belt." Marcus didn't respond. He stood there, watching the door to the women's changing room, his mind racing. This couldn't be the end of it. He needed to know. He needed answers. He needed, though he wouldn't admit it to himself yet, A rematch on his terms. Marcus didn't sleep well that night. He kept replaying the sparring session in his mind, analyzing every movement, every mistake he'd made. The problem was, he couldn't identify where he'd gone wrong. His techniques had been solid, his timing had been good. She'd just been better, operating on a level he hadn't encountered before. By morning, his embarrassment had transformed into obsession. He needed to understand what had happened. More than that, he needed to prove to himself and everyone else at the gym that last night had been a fluke, a lucky break for her. Marcus Chen didn't get beaten by random women who wandered into his gym. He arrived at the martial arts studio earlier than usual, hoping to catch Sarah before classes started. She was at the front desk, sorting through paperwork and sipping coffee from a travel mug. "Morning, Marcus," she said without looking up. "Hey, Sarah, that woman from last night, is she coming back? Did she sign up for a membership?" Sarah glanced at him over her reading glasses. Why the sudden interest? Marcus tried to play it casual. Just curious. She had some interesting techniques. Thought I might ask where she trained. She paid for a day pass, Sarah said, returning to her paperwork. Didn't say if she'd be back. Marcus felt frustration rising in his chest. A day pass. She could be gone, disappeared back into whatever hole she'd crawled out of, and he'd never get his rematch. Did she leave a name? A phone number? "Marcus," Sarah said, her tone sharpening. "You know I can't give out member information, even if I had it." He wanted to argue, to press harder, but Sarah had been managing this gym longer than he'd been training there. She didn't tolerate nonsense. Marcus nodded and headed to the changing room, his mood dark. The morning class was a disaster. Marcus tried to focus on teaching his students, but his mind kept drifting. He demonstrated techniques with less precision than usual. He snapped at a blue belt for making a mistake he normally would have corrected patiently. By the time class ended, even his most loyal students were giving him concerned looks. Jake cornered him afterward in the equipment room. "Dude, you need to let this go." "Let what go?" Marcus asked, aggressively tightening the laces on his training shoes. "You know what? Last night, that woman, you've been in a mood since she threw you." "She got lucky," Marcus said, the words automatic, defensive. "I wasn't ready. I was going easy." Jake laughed, not unkindly. "Man, nobody who watched that thinks you were going easy. She's just better. It happens. Even to you." The words stung because they were true. Marcus had built his identity around being the best fighter in the room. It defined how he saw himself, how others saw him. To have that challenged, destroyed really, in front of everyone hurt worse than any physical blow he'd ever taken. "I need a rematch," Marcus said quietly. "On my terms, full contact. A real fight, not some light sparring session where I'm worried about hurting someone." "And if you lose again?" Jake asked. Marcus didn't answer because he couldn't conceive of that possibility. He wouldn't lose again. He couldn't. 3 days passed. Marcus trained harder than he had in months, pushing his body through grueling sessions. He studied techniques he'd neglected, reviewed footage of his competition fights, drilled scenarios over and over. Part of him knew he was being irrational, obsessing over a chance encounter. But the larger part, the part controlled by ego and wounded pride, demanded satisfaction. On Friday evening, Marcus was working the heavy bag when Sarah called out to him. "Marcus, you've got a visitor." He turned, and there she was. The woman from Tuesday night, standing in the entrance wearing the same plain workout clothes, the same calm expression. Marcus felt his heart rate spike. She'd come back. He grabbed his towel and walked over, trying to appear relaxed. "Decided to give us another try?" "Thought I'd come back for another workout," she said. "If that's okay." "Of course it's okay," Marcus said quickly. Too quickly. He needed to slow down, be strategic. "We're actually doing some serious sparring tonight. Full contact. Competition-level stuff. You interested?" She studied him, and Marcus knew she could see right through his casual facade. She knew exactly what he was asking and why. "I don't think that's a good idea," she said carefully. "Why not? You showed you can handle yourself. Unless Tuesday night was your best, and you don't want to push it." It was a cheap tactic, questioning her confidence. But Marcus was past caring about tactics. He needed this. She sighed, a small sound of resignation. What are the rules? Standard sparring rules. Controlled strikes. No groin shots. No small joint manipulation. 3-minute rounds. We go until someone submits or taps out. And after this, you'll let it go? She asked. Marcus nodded, though he wasn't sure if he was lying. After this, we're even. She looked around the gym, at the students setting up for evening training, at the mats that would soon be their arena. Okay, she said finally. 1 round. Then I'm done. They geared up separately, and word spread quickly through the gym. By the time they stepped onto the main mat, a crowd had gathered again. Marcus noticed some people filming on their phones and almost told them to stop, then decided he wanted footage of his redemption. This time, Marcus didn't underestimate her. From the moment they touched gloves, he fought seriously. He used his footwork to maintain distance, threw probing strikes to gauge her reactions, defended carefully against counters. For the first minute, he felt confident. He was landing strikes, controlling the pace, using his size and reach advantage effectively. But then he noticed something troubling. She wasn't getting tired. She wasn't slowing down. If anything, she was reading him better with each exchange, anticipating his combinations, finding the small gaps in his defense. Her counters became sharper, more precise. She started mixing levels, striking high, then low, making him work harder to defend. Marcus pressed harder, throwing a powerful leg kick that she absorbed, a spinning back fist that she ducked under, a takedown attempt that she sprawled out of perfectly. Every technique he'd spent 15 years developing, she had an answer for. It wasn't luck. It wasn't chance. It was skill, at a level Marcus had never encountered outside professional fighters. 2 minutes into the round, Marcus made a mistake. He threw a lazy jab, his arms getting heavy from the pace, and she exploded forward. In a blur of motion that Marcus's brain couldn't process fast enough, she trapped his extended arm, got inside his guard, and executed a takedown that was different from Tuesday night. This one was harder, more authoritative. Marcus slammed onto the mat with real force. Before he could react, she'd transitioned to a mounted position, controlled his posture, and secured a submission hold. Marcus felt the pressure on his arm, knew he was caught, knew he had seconds before real damage occurred. His ego screamed at him to fight it, to muscle out, but his training overrode his pride. He tapped. 3 sharp taps on the mat with his free hand. She released immediately, moving away to give him space. Marcus lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling again, feeling the eyes of everyone in the gym on him. The silence was deafening. He got up slowly, removed his mouthguard, and faced her. She'd already taken off her gloves and was waiting patiently. "Who are you?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Really?" Before she could answer, the gym door opened. 2 men walked in, and Marcus immediately recognized the type. Military bearing, alert eyes, the kind of controlled presence that marked serious operators. They wore casual civilian clothes, but everything about them screamed official business. They approached the woman, and one of them said quietly, "Major, we need to go. The briefing's been moved up." Major. The word hung in the air like a bomb. The woman nodded to them, then turned back to Marcus. "I'm sorry. I tried to avoid this." "You're military," Marcus said, his mind racing to catch up. "What branch? What unit?" She hesitated, clearly weighing how much to say. One of the men with her stepped forward. "Sir, we need to remind you about operational security." But the woman held up a hand. "It's fine, Sergeant." She looked at Marcus, and for the first time, he saw her as she really was. Not a random gym visitor, not a lucky amateur, a warrior who operated at the highest levels of combat. "I can't tell you my unit," she said, "but I can tell you I've been training since I was 16. Special operations, multiple deployments, hand-to-hand combat is part of my job, not my hobby." Marcus felt his legs weaken. Special operations. That explained everything. The techniques he didn't recognize, the calm under pressure, the efficiency of movement. He'd been trying to measure himself against someone who'd been trained by the best instructors in the world to fight and survive in the most dangerous situations imaginable. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "Would you have believed me?" she countered. "Or would you have thought I was lying, making excuses?" Marcus knew the answer. He wouldn't have believed her. His ego wouldn't have let him believe her. Besides, she continued, I wasn't here to prove anything. I was just passing through town, wanted to get a workout in. You're the one who pushed for this. She was right. And Marcus knew it. He'd pushed, taunted, insisted on proving something that didn't need proving. And now he stood exposed, not just as the weaker fighter, but as the smaller person. I'm sorry, Marcus said, the words difficult but necessary. I was arrogant, disrespectful. You tried to spare me this, and I didn't listen. She nodded, accepting the apology. You're a good fighter, Marcus, a good teacher. You've got nothing to be ashamed of. You just picked the wrong person to challenge. One of the men with her checked his watch. Major, we really do need to leave. She grabbed her bag and started toward the door, then paused and turned back. Can I give you some advice? Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. The best fighters I know, the ones who've survived the worst situations, they're not the ones with the biggest egos. They're the ones who never stop learning, who respect everyone they meet because they know there's always someone better, always something new to discover. Pride is a weakness in combat. Humility is what keeps you alive. With that, she left, flanked by the two men. The gym door closed behind them, and Marcus stood alone on the mat, surrounded by students who didn't know what to say. Jake approached cautiously. You okay? Marcus took a deep breath, processing everything that had just happened. No, he admitted, but I will be. He looked around at the gym, at the students, at the life he'd built around martial arts. Nothing had really changed. The mats were still there. His belt still meant something. He was still a skilled fighter and a good teacher. What had changed was his perspective. For years, Marcus had thought being the best fighter in the room made him successful. But watching that woman walk away, seeing her confidence that came not from dominating others, but from genuine capability forged in real danger, Marcus realized he'd been measuring success wrong. That night, after everyone else had left, Marcus sat in the empty gym and thought about what it meant to be a martial artist. Not just someone who could fight, but someone who embodied the principles behind the fighting. Respect, discipline, continuous growth, humility. He'd spent 15 years building his skills, but had neglected to build his character. The woman had given him more than 2 defeats. She'd given him a mirror, and what he'd seen reflected back had been uncomfortable but necessary. Marcus pulled out his phone and started typing a message to his students. He'd been thinking about organizing a seminar, bringing in outside instructors from different styles and backgrounds, people who could teach techniques and perspectives different from his own. It was time to stop being the biggest fish in a small pond and start learning what the ocean had to offer. His phone buzzed with an incoming message. Unknown number. Marcus opened it. If you're serious about improving, there's a training camp in Virginia next month. Mix of military combatives, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and reality-based self-defense. I can get you in if you're interested. Just don't bring the ego. No signature, but Marcus knew who it was from. He stared at the message for a long time, feeling the weight of the opportunity. This wasn't about redemption or revenge. This was about growth, real growth, the kind that required admitting he had room to improve. Marcus typed his response, just 2 words, I'm interested. The reply came quickly. Good, I'll send details. And Marcus? Thanks for the sparring. It reminded me why I do this work. Teaching is part of the mission too. Marcus smiled, a genuine smile that felt unfamiliar after days of frustration and wounded pride. He'd been beaten, humbled, shown the limits of his abilities, but he'd also been offered a path forward, a chance to become more than he was. He stood up, bowed to the empty mat as he always did before leaving, and walked toward the door. Tomorrow he'd come back and teach his classes with new understanding. He'd still be Marcus Chen, black belt and instructor. But maybe now he'd also be Marcus Chen, student of the endless journey. The training camp in Virginia was nothing like Marcus expected. He'd imagined a structured facility with professional instructors and organized classes. Instead, he found himself at a converted warehouse on a military base, surrounded by people who moved and talked like they'd seen things Marcus had only read about in books. The woman from his gym, whose name he learned was Captain Rachel Morrison, wasn't there when he arrived. A grizzled instructor named Chief Dawson checked him in, looked at his credentials, and assigned him to the intermediate group without comment. Marcus wanted to protest, to mention his competition record and 15 years of experience, but something in the chief's eyes made him stay quiet. The first day broke him. Not physically, though the training was brutal, but mentally. Marcus discovered that his techniques, so effective in the controlled environment of his gym, had serious limitations in the chaos of multiple opponents, low light conditions, and scenario-based fighting. His footwork, perfected for one-on-one combat, became a liability when bodies came from multiple angles. His favorite combinations, which always worked against other sport fighters, were countered easily by men and women who'd used violence as a professional tool. By the end of day one, Marcus was covered in bruises, exhausted beyond anything his regular training had produced, and questioning every assumption he'd made about fighting. That night, in the barrack-style sleeping quarters, he lay awake listening to other participants swap stories about deployments, close calls, and lessons learned the hard way. Rachel showed up on day 3. Marcus saw her arrive in the morning, talking with Chief Dawson and another senior instructor. She was wearing military fatigues now, her hair pulled back tight, and the difference in her demeanor was striking. This was her world, her element. The gym had been her trying to fit into civilian life. This was who she really was. She taught the afternoon session, focusing on close-quarters combat and weapon retention. Marcus found himself in her group, and if she remembered their previous encounters, she didn't show it. She treated him exactly like every other student, with firm professionalism and zero tolerance for ego or excuses. The session started with a lecture. "Everything you've learned in sport fighting has value," Rachel said, addressing the group. "But you need to understand the differences between that and what we do. In sport, you have rules, weight classes, time limits, and a referee to stop things if they go bad. In operations, you have none of that. You might be fighting someone twice your size while wearing 40 pounds of gear in complete darkness. The techniques that win tournaments might get you killed in the field." She demonstrated scenarios, each one designed to challenge assumptions. Fighting while wounded, fighting while protecting someone else, fighting in confined spaces where proper technique was impossible. Marcus watched, absorbing every detail, realizing how much he didn't know. When it came time for practical drills, Rachel paired Marcus with a wiry Marine named Gomez, who looked unimpressive until the fighting started. Gomez destroyed Marcus using techniques that were ugly, brutally effective, and nothing like the clean martial arts Marcus had practiced. There was no art to it, just violence applied efficiently to achieve a goal. "You're telegraphing," Rachel said, watching Marcus struggle. "Your stance, your breathing, your eyes, everything tells me what you're about to do." That works fine when you're both playing the same game. It gets you hurt when your opponent isn't playing. She stepped in to demonstrate, moving Marcus through positions, showing him how his body language betrayed his intentions before he moved. It was humbling, but different from their gym encounters. This wasn't about ego. This was education, pure and simple. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus underwent a transformation. The instructors systematically deconstructed his fighting style, pointing out weaknesses he'd never recognized. But they also built him back up, showing him how to adapt what he knew to more realistic contexts. His techniques didn't disappear. They evolved, becoming less about looking good and more about working under stress. Rachel took a particular interest in his progress, though Marcus suspected she did this with all students. She'd occasionally pull him aside after sessions to correct something or explain a concept in more detail. There was no gloating, no reference to their previous encounters. She was simply a teacher helping a student improve. One evening, after a particularly difficult day of training, Marcus found Rachel sitting alone outside the warehouse, cleaning her pistol under a work light. He approached hesitantly. "Can I join you?" he asked. She gestured to a nearby chair. "Free country. Well, on base anyway." Marcus sat, watching her work. Her movements were practiced, automatic, the kind of muscle memory that came from thousands of repetitions. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "for getting me into this program. It's been eye-opening." "You're doing well," Rachel said, not looking up from her weapon. Better than I expected, actually. Most people with your background struggle harder with letting go of what they think they know. I'm trying to be less of a know-it-all, Marcus admitted with a slight smile. Not always succeeding, but trying. Rachel reassembled her pistol with practiced efficiency. Can I ask you something? Why did you push so hard that night at the gym? You had to know something was off about me. My movement, my positioning. What made you insist on proving yourself? Marcus thought about the question. Really thought about it. Honestly? Fear. Fear that if I wasn't the best fighter in the room, I wasn't anything. I built my entire identity around that. Teaching, training, competing. It was all about being superior. When you showed up and challenged that without even trying, it threatened everything I thought I was. Rachel nodded slowly. I see that a lot, especially with guys. You measure yourselves against each other constantly. Who's stronger, faster, tougher? It's exhausting just watching it. Is it different in your world? Marcus asked. In special operations? Completely, Rachel said. Don't get me wrong, there's competition. Everyone wants to be good at what they do, but it's not about being better than each other. It's about being good enough to keep your team alive. Your ego doesn't matter when someone's depending on you. All that matters is capability and reliability. She paused, checking her weapon one more time before holstering it. The best operators I know are the ones who check their ego at the door. They're constantly learning, constantly adapting, constantly questioning their own assumptions, because the mission matters more than their pride. Marcus absorbed this, recognizing the fundamental difference between his old mindset and what he was learning here. How do you do it? Stay humble when you're as skilled as you are? Rachel laughed quietly. You think I'm humble? I'm confident in my abilities, sure. But I've also seen people better than me. I've worked with operators who can do things I'll never be able to do. And I've lost teammates, good people who were better fighters than me but caught bad luck. That keeps you grounded real fast. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, training experiences, funny stories from their respective backgrounds. Marcus learned that Rachel had grown up doing martial arts too, starting in Taekwondo before transitioning to more combat-focused styles when she enlisted. She'd been in the military for 12 years, working her way up through special operations selection, earning her place in a Tier 1 unit through the same brutal training that broke most candidates. Do you ever miss normal training? Marcus asked. Like what we do at civilian gyms? Just fighting for the sport of it? Sometimes, Rachel admitted. It's simpler, cleaner. You bow, you fight, you bow again. Win or lose, everyone goes home. What we do? It's messier. The stakes are real. But, yeah, I miss the purity of it sometimes. That's why I was at your gym that night. Just wanted to move, to train without the weight of everything else. And then I had to make it complicated, Marcus said with genuine regret. Rachel shrugged. You didn't know. And honestly, maybe it worked out for the best. You're here now, learning things that'll make you a better instructor. And maybe you'll pass that knowledge on, help other people avoid the mistakes you made. Over the remaining days of camp, Marcus absorbed everything he could. He trained with Green Berets, Navy SEALs, Marine Raiders, and other special operations personnel. Each brought different perspectives, different techniques, different philosophies. Marcus stopped trying to defend his way of doing things and started asking questions instead. Why do you grip that way? What's the principle behind that movement? How do you train this under stress? The instructors responded to his genuine curiosity with patient teaching. Chief Dawson, who'd seemed intimidating at first, turned out to be a thoughtful instructor who loved breaking down complex problems into understandable pieces. An Army Ranger named Phillips showed Marcus how to adapt his striking to work while wearing body armor and carrying equipment. A female Marine named Chen taught him principles of leverage that worked regardless of size difference. Rachel continued to be a consistent presence, tough but fair, pushing Marcus when he needed pushing and offering encouragement when he struggled. Their relationship evolved from antagonists to something like colleagues, mutual respect built on honest interaction. On the final day of camp, there was a graduation ceremony of sorts. Nothing official, just the instructors acknowledging the students who'd completed the program. Chief Dawson called Marcus forward, and to his surprise, Rachel was standing there, holding something. Marcus Chen, the chief said. You came here with skills and left with understanding. That's the best outcome we can hope for. Captain Morrison has something for you. Rachel stepped forward and handed Marcus a patch. It was simple, just an embroidered design showing a mountain with the words, "Embrace the climb" beneath it. "This is from my unit," Rachel explained. "We give these to people who show they understand what we're about. Not perfection, not being the best, just continuous improvement and willingness to face hard truths. You've earned it." Marcus took the patch, feeling the weight of what it represented. Not a trophy for winning, not a medal for being superior, just recognition that he'd shown up, struggled, and grown. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "For everything. For humbling me, teaching me, and giving me this chance." Rachel smiled. "Thank you for being willing to learn. Not everyone is." That night, after the camp officially ended, a group of participants gathered for an unofficial celebration at a local bar. Marcus found himself surrounded by warriors, listening to their stories, sharing his own. The atmosphere was different from his gym back home. Less competition, more camaraderie. These people had nothing to prove to each other. Rachel showed up late, out of uniform, looking more like the woman who'd walked into his gym weeks ago. She joined Marcus at the bar, ordering a beer. "So, what's next for you?" she asked. "Back to your gym? Back to teaching?" "Yeah," Marcus said, "but different. Better, I hope. I want to incorporate what I learned here. Not turn my gym into a military training facility, but bring in some of these principles. Teach my students to be less about ego and more about growth." "That's good," Rachel said approvingly. "The world needs more teachers like that." "What about you?" Marcus asked. "More deployments? More dangerous missions I can't know about?" Rachel laughed. "Something like that, but I'm also working on transition planning. I won't do this forever. Eventually, I want to teach too. Pass on what I've learned. Maybe open a training center for veterans. Help them translate their military skills to civilian life." They talked late into the night, two fighters from different worlds finding common ground. Marcus learned about the challenges of military service, the toll it took, the pride and pain that came with it. Rachel learned about running a civilian gym, the rewards of teaching regular people to be more confident and capable. As the night wound down and people started leaving, Rachel walked Marcus to his rental car. "I'm glad you came," she said. "Not many people are willing to face what you faced these past weeks. The ego death, the realization that you're not as good as you thought. Most people would have quit or made excuses. You did the work." "I didn't really have a choice," Marcus said. "You'd already broken my ego back at the gym. Coming here was just cleaning up the pieces." Rachel smiled. "Fair enough, but you chose to clean them up instead of staying broken. That counts for something." They exchanged contact information, professional courtesy between martial artists. Marcus knew he probably wouldn't see her again. Their lives were too different, their paths diverging. But she'd changed his trajectory, forced him to confront truths about himself he'd been avoiding. The drive back home took 2 days. Marcus used the time to think, to process everything he'd experienced. The training had been intense, but the real lessons were subtler. About respecting others, about staying humble, about recognizing that fighting skill was just one small part of being a martial artist. When Marcus walked back into his gym, Jake was teaching a class. Students called out greetings, genuinely happy to see him back. The place looked the same, smelled the same, felt the same. But Marcus was different. He waited until the class ended, then gathered his senior students together. "I need to make some changes," he announced, "to how we train, how we teach, how we think about martial arts. I'm going to need your help." Over the following months, Marcus transformed his gym. Not the physical space, but the culture. He invited instructors from different styles to teach seminars. He emphasized principles over techniques, understanding over repetition. He encouraged students to question and explore rather than simply follow. Most importantly, Marcus changed how he taught. Less demonstration of his superiority, more patient explanation. Less talking, more listening. He shared stories from Virginia about operators who treated training as continuous improvement rather than proof of dominance. Some students didn't like the changes. A few of the more competitive ones left, seeking gyms where they could focus purely on winning. Marcus let them go without resentment. His gym wasn't for everyone anymore, and that was okay. But other students flourished. They became more thoughtful fighters, more complete martial artists. They started training not to prove themselves, but to better themselves. The transformation wasn't complete and probably never would be. But it was real. 6 months after Virginia, Marcus received an email from Rachel. She was being transferred to a new assignment, something she couldn't discuss, but wanted to check in on his progress. Marcus wrote back, sharing the changes he'd made, the lessons he'd learned, the impact she'd had. Her response was brief but meaningful. Proud of you. Keep climbing. Marcus printed the email and posted it on his office wall, next to the patch from Virginia. They served as reminders, not of defeat, but of growth. Of the night, a stranger walked into his gym and showed him that being a true martial artist meant so much more than being able to fight. He still taught classes 3 times a week. He still had his black belt, still had his skills, still had his gym, but now he had something more important: perspective. The understanding that every person who walked through his door had something to teach him if he was humble enough to learn. Marcus watched his students training, seeing them not as subordinates to dominate but as fellow travelers on the martial path. Each one climbing their own mountain, facing their own challenges, growing at their own pace. And sometimes, when a new student walked in looking uncertain or when a cocky fighter needed humbling, Marcus thought about Rachel and smiled. The best lessons he'd learned often came from the most unexpected teachers. All you had to do was be willing to learn them.